Aurora Teagarden is a librarian and landlord in the small town of Lawrencetown, Georgia. She's also a member of the Real Murders Club, a club that meets once a month to discuss and analyze real murder cases. But when Aurora discovers the body of a club member, she realizes the victim's death is nearly identical to the murder they were going to discuss that particular meeting. Soon, all the club members find themselves implicated in some way in multiple copycat murders that racks the entire town. Welcome to Fictional Narrative. I'm Neri, and it's Cozy Saturday. Cozy Saturday is a series where I talk about the most recent cozy mystery that I've delved into. I'll give the non-spoiler warning, a rating, and then the spoiler warning, and then we're going to go into the spoilery part of the review. This week, I am reviewing Real Murders by Charlaine Harris, and this is the first book in the Aurora Teagarden mysteries. As I've already laid out, the premise of the mystery is interesting, but it's also handled really, really well. The entire mystery itself is written in a kind of gritty, maybe even less cozy way, but still being set in a small town that allows the author to create a closeness between characters and understanding between backgrounds that otherwise we would have not known. And that is one of the pluses of this story, is that the author does give us hints and explanations and things like that that bring all of the club members of Real Murders to life. As someone who can relate to Aurora, or Ro as she's also known, as someone who is interested in true crime, I can see that throughout the series, as it continues, she goes over the different motives that people have to be part of Real Murders, and it's not always a nice thing. Some people have a morbid curiosity. For her, she just feels like she's learning from those particular cases that are being discussed. And of course, it's no coincidence that the targets of this crime have all implicated in some way the members of this club. That's kind of the frightening thing about it. You don't know if somebody is in there because they are morbidly curious to a regular extent. You don't know if they're there because they are inspired. You don't know if they're hybristophiliacs, or you don't know if they're just there because they're a very paranoid person or worried or whatever have you. But regardless, it gives Ro a small pool of characters that could be her main suspect. In the very beginning of the story, it opens up with Ro going to a meeting of Real Murders, and it is her turn within the group to present the case. And so when we find the body of the first victim, her death imitates that of the case that Ro is going to present. Obviously, that should put her at suspect number one. Thankfully, she has an alibi for that time. So at that point, we have to question, what would motivate Ro to continue to solve this mystery? And Ro is an extremely good sleuth. She has really good instincts for this kind of thing. And of course, she makes some missteps, as amateur sleuths do, but she is definitely a lot more clever than most that I have read recently. Sometimes it takes them about like 2, maybe 3 cases down the line before they kind of fall into routine of, this is what I have to do, this is what I have to search for. But with Ro, with her background and fascination of researching true crime, she kind of has that already in a way. And this could turn out very dangerously for her, or it can turn out very good for her. But again, I will say the author's writing is a little gritty. So with that, I did not expect at all that the main character was going to have an easy run with this mystery. The ending, it was great. I even loved the possible romances and connections that she has. There's more than one, but it's never treated in a bad way. It's as if the author is trying to angle the character into a healthy dating attitude, which I really do appreciate. I understand with a small town setting, it may not always be that easy. With that being said, I do have to talk about some negatives for this particular book. What I found was that the setting itself was not very developed. We get the surface level sort of introductory to every single character. And I think that the reason that this is because the mystery itself is so big and so, like, almost thriller in a way. But as thriller as cozy can get, you know? There would not be a huge balance of knowing these characters, like, fully developed versus doing the best that the author can while keeping the reader focused on the mystery and the main character focused on the mystery. So I would say that I've got a good introduction to the characters. I wish there was more, but again, it is a series, so I will just have to see. There were times in this story where I thought, wow, the character could just literally see herself out, because there is motive for her to still attempt to solve the mystery once she's no longer a suspect. However, that doesn't last very long. It's like the mystery itself pulls her in and spits her back out. And the murderer, in this sense, finds her to be an easy target, so she just keeps getting the short end of the stick. Maybe not even in the events that happen, but what if in character development the author could give me a reason as to why Ro would still participate in the sleuthing? Because she has a lot on the line in comparison to the risks that she's taking. So before we get into that, though, that will be more of a spoilery part. My rating for this was a 3 out of 5 as a good introduction to a series. 3 out of 5 is pretty good, pretty average, right? And I think I will be revisiting this series just because looking at the synopsis of the other books in the series, Ro seems to go through a lot of different changes book to book, and I want to see what does happen, because maybe the character development that is missing here is something that I discover more of in another book. I'll give it like 2 or 3 books down the line to see if I'm still actually really interested in it, and I think that's fair. So now let's go ahead and get to the spoilery section. So I really liked the antagonist of the story just because the way that the author made these copycat killings out to be and the resolutions made sense. Now, our killer is basically a serial killer because of all these copycats, but we also find that their cool-off period is just either short to almost non-existent. But I understand how that would be believable given the adrenaline rush probably of committing and getting away with the first murder. So what we see is that the need for the killer to kill again or to copy another crime again is escalating rapidly, which of course causes them to make mistakes, which is good. That is what we want. That is how we're going to catch our killer. Unfortunately, it should probably have been way quicker than that, but the killer was smart enough to evade the police, which I don't know so much that you'd have to be smart to evade the police in this case. The police did almost nothing but show up and catalog. At one point, a police officer who was also a member of Real Murders is implicated, and they're like, okay, well, you need to sit this one out, which, okay, fair, but they are way quicker to do that than to entertain the thought that people are being framed, and it probably has to do with somebody in that group. Essentially, the police almost have no suspects at all. Like, who are they looking into? Just, what, the person who they think is unhinged, that is like, that must be that person? Like, they have a history of it, so it must be them? But it's not. Because the crimes itself and the escalation of those crimes do not denote that somebody is just... It doesn't say anything, basically, is what I'm saying. Even if somebody has had, like, a hard time within that town and they have a certain reputation, that doesn't mean that they would escalate to that. Let's say if somebody was picked up for like robbery, they broke into a car and stole some money or something. That doesn't mean that they'll escalate to murder and these types of murders and target these particular people for what? The police just absolutely make no sense to me in this book. Bonus points for the author, though, that it's not because the police are dumb that our sleuth is smart. The police are just dumb on their own regardless. Because our sleuth is just doing exactly what amateur sleuths do when they go to gather information. So it's really like, why are the police on the case like this? It doesn't really make sense that they're like 3 steps behind at all times. But I also want to revisit what I mentioned earlier about Ro not leaving when it's not necessary for her to be part of it anymore. For example, in the beginning of the book, when we have our first murder victim, it's understandable that Ro would be the person who is involved. When they rule her out, okay, that's fine. It makes sense that she's going to stay in her home. It was just a shock and we've only had 1 murder. Then what? We have some attempts and another murder? She's not implicated in those, and yet she won't leave. On one hand, she was almost a victim herself, but I think that's also more reason to leave. Because very early on, Rose suspects that, hey, maybe it's somebody in real murders or somebody who hates real murders before the cops even think about it. In that sense, if people are being targeted because they're simply part of this group, why wouldn't you just leave town? Her mother constantly tells her, leave town. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Ro also reveals during a phone conversation that her parents, who have long divorced, her dad remarried, she has a very young brother. Like, he's not even in double digits yet. And Ro is supposed to take care of him while his parents are away on a trip. I don't understand why at that point she wouldn't just go to their residence to watch him. Why have him come all the way out? Her dad and stepmom were like, hey, if this is still an issue, if you're worried about having him out there, we don't have to send him out there. Like, they knew she had choices, but she's told by one of the police officer who's also part of the club, she's told by him that, hey, we had a confession. But she says, you know, it doesn't feel right to her. And if it doesn't feel right to you yet, even if, let's say, that confession was true, if you don't feel right, it's because you don't feel safe because you've been put through this ordeal. So it would make sense and honestly would probably be better for your mental health to get away. That, I think, is the one mistake that Ro made throughout the entire book. And there's so much room for an amateur sleuth to make so many mistakes in this book. But this is the one mistake that she made. And because, like I said, the author's writing is a little gritty for cozy mystery, it works out well from the reader's perspective. But if you as a reader are putting yourself in that position, I think everybody would think, oh my god, you're putting a child in danger. Stop. So I am definitely going to pick up the next book in this series, although I really hope that next time that I do, I get a better feel of the town and its people, because I also want to be immersed in the setting and not just the mystery. I think if this author just wrote a straight up mystery instead of a cozy mystery, it would be fine. And I do have to wonder on some level how much of that is marketing, just because I've seen a lot of this author's name on cozy mystery shelves, and so it's like her audience knows her from there. That is it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that the next cozy mystery that I'm reading is going to be a little more on the cozy end, just because we're getting into the winter season and I want to feel like the coziness, I guess. But not so spoiler alert, but chapter 1 of the next cozy mystery that I'm reading already has the 911 dispatcher hanging up on the caller because she thinks that it's a social call or a joke. So we'll see. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye!